All right. Well, it looks like we had some other people step in, so we're just going to go ahead and get started now. Give about 5 minutes after. But I just wanted to welcome everybody and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come here and listen to us talk about the special education process and that case manager position, that case manager role, and then data handling. We know that sometimes some of that stuff can be a little dry, a little bit difficult, so we've peppered in some hopefully funny memes and that kind of stuff throughout just to kind of help lighten the mood and lighten the afternoon, given that especially this is Friday and everybody's ready to go home and enjoy the weekend, hopefully, not have a bunch of paperwork that you're taking home with you. So I just wanted to get started talking a little bit about who we are. My name is Derek Smith, and I am the psychologist and consultant with the U-TTEC lab at the University of Utah. We work in partnership with the Washington County School District, providing consultative services to classrooms and just kind of a lot of behavior supports and those kinds of things. So then we have...
I'm Annie. I am a lab coordinator for the U-TTEC lab at the University of Utah. I assist Derek and Chat on our project here on teleconsultation. I do behavioral observations, and I help put together workshops like these. So I'm really happy to be here today.
Awesome, thank you, Annie. So my name is Chat, and kind of what Derek mentioned, we work together, kind of collaborating, consulting with schools, the district in general, and kind of helping smoothen this process for you as much as possible. So we're super grateful to be here. And for those of you who are just showing up, feel free to help yourselves to refreshments. Feel free to take breaks, bathroom breaks as you need, but we will be kind of giving you structure around this. We'll kind of cover the case management portion of it, which will approximately be 45 minutes to an hour. We'll give you like a break of around 20-ish minutes, and then we'll come back for the last portion of it, which is kind of data collection. So through this process, like Dave mentioned, we're trying to keep it very light, very less lecture-based, but more like talking to y'all and see how things are going, because we just want to hear from y'all as well. So just a little rundown of how today's going to go.
Yeah, and so thank you everybody who is here today. We just want to take a quick poll before we jump into our content. So just quick show of hands if you're a special education teacher here today. Okay, thank you. Quick show of hands if you're a paraprofessional, RBT, student teacher. Okay, awesome. Quick show of hands if you're an occupational therapist, physical therapist, SLP, speech language pathologist. Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think that's mostly everybody. Oh, behavioral supports, if you're here. Specialists.
Our team in the back here.
Okay, awesome. We got everybody. So we got a good mix. We like to see that.
Yeah, awesome. Still have people showing up.
Yeah, as you're coming in, feel free to grab refreshments, grab a seat.
And always sit in the wall of the shame, those late stragglers.
I get more space for me.
As I said, we wanted to bring in a lot of the, these memes are going to be peppered throughout. I'm sure they probably are some way related to the things that you're experiencing most of the time. Professional development, we definitely know this is where most people are on Friday afternoon. But we hope that you have some time to be able to get something from this. We hope that it's informative. And like Chat was saying, this is going to be very much of a survey. We're not going to be able to cover all of the topics, all of the things. We did read through the survey responses, getting some of the questions that you all responded to and provided. So we'll try to touch on as many of those things as we possibly can, but they also will be helpful for us in developing future professional development trainings and bringing some of those answers to you. But in the short 2.5 hours that we have, we'll get as much in as we can. So also, as Chat was mentioning, the purpose of today is that we want to do the survey of the case manager roles of the common related services, just a kind of refresher. Team communication, which we know has been a big common thing that folks have talked about, wanting to be able to communicate a little bit better, and how do I communicate, and are there other opportunities out there? Data collection methods, and then using technology to kind of streamline that data collection process. We talked about the schedule already. We'll talk about case management, have the break, go into the data collection, question and answer, and then we will get you out of here on time. A couple of things about, we referenced some of the important documents that are highly related to special education. We referenced your Washington County Special Education Policy, document 8000, for those of you who have not seen it. And hopefully you've seen it at one point or another. Hopefully you read through it from time to time, but we won't get into all the details on that. And then the Utah State Board of Education Special Education Rules, which again, probably something you're all very familiar with, but just wanted to let you know, we are looking at the actual rules and things as we're putting these things together. I think many people can relate to this. Being a special educator, not just a special education teacher, but in any of the roles that you all play in special education, you have very likely run into just about everything you can see, and if you haven't seen it before, you've seen some variation of it, and you've written a goal for it. And so that, we just wanted to recognize that as part of today, one of the things that we want you all to get a sense of is that there are a number of professionals within the district, within the schools that you're working with, but also people that you're not working directly with. And we're hoping that this can be a place where you can talk with one another, you can kind of share ideas, and you can also see that there's a lot of really good talent and a lot of good ideas and things here in the district that you can share with one another, to kind of have the ability to communicate that among things. And I can just tell you from personal experience, working with several of those of you who are in the audience here today, those of you who are watching on the video, I've seen so many different ideas that are very individual for a certain classroom, and then I'll go to another classroom and like, wow, that would really help over here. And so connecting with one another, even within the district, can be really helpful in having those opportunities to share. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but the survey of the role of the case manager, as you all know, and those of you who aren't in the case manager role much of the time or at all, these are just a sampling of the things that are on the plate of the case manager. There's the data coordination and review, taking in all of that data, taking all that new information from somebody who, for example, is coming into the district new and is playing a role, not playing a role, but coming in and being a new student in your class. You have to take all of that data from the other district, you have to take all of that information from outside and then figure out like what is it that we need to provide for this student. So coordinating all of that, coordinating the evaluations, knowing what all the other services are and who are the people that I need to be in touch with as part of this IEP team process to develop this IEP for an incoming person. How do I coordinate all of these evaluations? How do I reach out to the individuals that are doing that and then following through with that? IEP coordination, reevaluation coordination, manifestation determination. So figuring out, is this behavior a manifestation of the specific disability or educational classification that this person has, or is this from something completely different, and how do we navigate that process? One of the really important aspects of that is ensuring IEP fidelity, and one thing that we've run into a lot, and not here specifically, but just across the board, is that sometimes that's really difficult to do, is making sure, one, that there are correct goals in place, there are correct objectives in place, and two, that those objectives and goals are being addressed. Those things are being focused on in a way that shows outsiders, people who are not familiar with the process or who are expecting certain things to have been done, say with their student, their child, and making sure that there's some data or something to reflect that, which is part of why we'll have the data collection, data procedures to kind of help with that process as well. Team communication, we'll touch on that a little bit later. Meeting coordination, parent and or adult student participation in the IEPs. That's something I've seen not happen sometimes, where the parents are like, I don't know what's actually going on, and having them participate in that process. And transition planning, and then service coordination and management. That's another one of those big ones, is around being able to make sure that when a service is brought in, where say we have one of these related services, SLP, OT, PT, those kinds of things, and can we make sure that those individuals are showing up when they're supposed to be doing that, or are providing the information that they're supposed to be providing? And I know that was one of the questions that came in from one of our related service providers, is how do I help in that case management process? And so we'll touch on that a little bit as well. So with all of that, you see, there are a lot of things, as you all know, are on your plate as the case manager, as the special education teacher, as a related service provider, as anybody within that process. But I imagine it often feels like this. Scheduling the caseload is, hundreds of blocks, trying to figure out how to put it all together in one place. And then this other one here, I think this fits for all of us. This fits for me as well. You're always throwing things at you, piling things up. In the past, it was always a giant pile of papers that were printed out sitting on the desk, and now it's a mix of that and a pile of emails that we have sitting in our inbox, trying to go through all of that and figure things out. And with that, we're going to switch over a little bit, have Annie talk a bit about our related services.
Thank you, Derek. So, quick refresher on related services or additional supports. I realize probably most of you already know all of these services, but a refresher is always nice. So first off, speech-language pathology. These are services provided by a licensed speech-language pathologist, and what they do is essentially evaluate, treat, or diagnose individuals or students with speech or language impairments. So that could be a SLP working with a student with limited verbal communication, or helping a student with pronouncing certain words. So that's SLP, speech-language pathology. Occupational therapy. These are services provided by a licensed occupational therapist. What they do is they assess and create interventions and help implement those interventions to develop and improve a student's ability to perform activities of daily living, or how to live their best life, as I like to say. Some of these examples include toilet training, how to hold a pencil correctly, or how to tie a shoe, how to button a shirt. A lot of these small little activities you don't really think about, but you kind of have to do in your everyday life. An occupational therapist can help a student to achieve those goals. Physical therapy, again, services provided by a licensed physical therapist. What they do is they assess, create interventions, and implement interventions to improve a student's ability to move in their physical environment. So this is a little bit different from occupational therapy in the sense that it's more gross motor skills. So how to walk in a straight line, how to dribble a ball when you're playing basketball, or even how to hold yourself up, posture control. Other additional support / related services, audiology. This is more so with listening. So audiologists, they identify students with hearing loss or progressive hearing loss, assessment of the range of their hearing loss, treatment of programs to prevent hearing loss. And audiologists can also determine a student's needs for hearing aids and any group accommodation for that. School psychologists, which we have a couple on our team, they administer assessments, they direct support and interventions, they do a lot of data collection, hold workshops for you guys. Primarily they consult with teachers, families, school mental health professionals. It's a very collaborative role. And last but not least, others, which I put us in that category because we're consultants. We provide direct consultative supports via telehealth, which is the whole thing of our project. We support the development of behavioral intervention plans. We assist with data collection as well as conduct behavioral observations to get that data in. And the whole thing I want to emphasize is a lot of these roles are very collaborative, especially as a case manager. You probably have worked with any of these related services.
And then in shout out to all of our related services folks, I picked out several of these that kind of fit with many of the things that we do. I think this middle one, even though it talks about social work, really fits across the board. How long does it take a social worker to change a light bulb, or special education teacher, or any of us? 10 seconds to do it, then 3 hours writing the case notes and assessment justifying the need for intervention, which I think is the biggest thing. Most of us, I would argue, would probably like to do the intervention stuff without writing all the paperwork that goes with it. And unfortunately, we can't really take a lot of that stuff away, but hopefully we can make it a little bit easier. So answering that question, how can related services support case management? And this is one of the questions, like I said, came up in the surveys. I saw it in a couple of places. And what is it that I can do as a OT, PT, SLP in supporting this whole case management process, knowing that there's a lot of folks, the special education teachers often are in this role of having to manage all of these things. What can I do to kind of ease that burden while also recognizing that I've got a lot of things on my plate too? And really, it's about just having that open communication, reviewing that service-related data prior to the meeting. So making sure that when a new student comes in, when we're having a specific team meeting, we're ready with our information, and we don't have to be reminded. We don't have to have somebody reach out to us and those kinds of things. And that's not to say like we're getting lazy or we're having a problem with being able to do it. Just knowing that we have a lot of things on our plate, but it's more just making sure that when we are aware of that we're doing those kinds of things and being prepared in that way. Conducting those assessments in a timely manner, same kind of thing. Developing understandable, measurable, observable IEP goals. This is one that I want to spend a couple of minutes on because this is something that I've also seen a lot across the board. And again, I see this in all sorts of districts where you have a goal or you have something and it's very broad and it's hard to understand. So when you're trying to take the data, when you're trying to implement an intervention around it, it's like, well, what does that actually mean? And from a psychologist psychotherapy standpoint, I think about that when a client comes into me and says, I want to be happy. Great, I think we all want to be happy, but what does happy look like? And what does happy mean to you? And so as the psychologist, if I want to be able to meet that goal of the client, of the student in this case, I need to be able to identify what does happy mean in an observable and measurable way. So what does that look like? How do you know you are happy? And how will I know you are happy? And so those are the kinds of things, making sure that when we're writing our goals, we are putting something in there that I can actually look at as an outsider. I can look at this goal and say, okay, I know what that means. I know that this person is saying, one word 5 consecutive times, with a certain amount of accuracy. And so I can take that data and I can translate that. And the same thing goes with objectives. A lot of times we also go to this other end of, well, we'll write a goal, but that's kind of the end of the year or the end of a certain period of time, rather than what are those intermediate steps. I see that a lot where it's like, here's the goal, it's being happy and it looks like this, but how do I know I'm achieving an approximation of that? How do I know that we're moving in the right direction with our movement towards happiness? So by having an objective that says, okay, here's kind of what sort of happy looks like. It's like I'm not frowning every day anymore, so now I smile more days than not, or something like that. I can put that as, that's not fully happy, but it's moving in that direction. And then I can know that as I'm doing the data collection, I'm doing the evaluation, that I'm looking at the information and says, okay, do they look like they're smiling more days than not? Yes, then we can move on to the next objective and we're heading towards that goal. No, we need to reevaluate the technique that we're using, the therapy we're using, whatever that intervention is, and move in a different way. So just making sure that those things are very clear as we're working, because as a case manager, you're looking at this and saying, like, okay, well, it's nice to move towards that goal of being happy, but what does that look like? How can I implement that? How can my classroom team, my RBTs, my paras, other people in the classroom, how can they implement that as well? And the other thing with that is making sure that the goals are not too jargony. So we all have our own words and things for how we describe things, but sometimes somebody who's coming in from the outside can look at that and be like, I have no idea what that means, and making sure that those are much clearer when we're communicating that with others. Next is providing scheduled services on time. So I talked about this earlier, just making sure, if there's something that you need to be doing 30 minutes, whatever, you're there for that service. I think we all, part of what we do. I don't think that's really a huge problem, but sometimes it can be. 2, if though there are cases where you're not able to make it to that meeting, you're not able to come in for that 30 minutes, that you're communicating that early as possible. So making sure that the individual case manager can come in and be like, oh, I don't know where so-and-so is, where the OT person is, and it kind of, there's a liability issue that comes in with that as far as all of this stuff, but there's also the additional stress for the case manager and trying to figure out where is this person, what are they doing. And then most importantly are these last two things. Providing training and protocols for interventions that you ask the classroom team to implement with a student. So making sure that like what we talked about with the goals, is that there's this sense of I know what I'm actually supposed to be doing. This is the specifics around how to do that. Making sure that when you come in, you have a speech goal, say you're doing functional communication training, that the person who's implementing that or people who are implementing that know exactly what that looks like. So for example, I need to know exactly what steps to take. I need to know how to achieve that particular objective, and I know that I do it from step 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and how many times I do that, and those kinds of things. And then with that, making sure that there's fidelity training. So coming in, observing, making sure that it is being implemented correctly, so that the folks know, like, okay, this is what I heard, and then you as the provider can see they're doing what I said or what I intended. And then lastly, providing data collection and presentation procedures for those same things. So now I know how to do it, how do I take the data on it? And so a lot of our paras, our RBTs, our case managers are looking at this and saying, we're moving towards this goal, but how do I actually show that on paper? How do I show that in a way that I can present in an IEP meeting or other meetings with parents or other people who may be interested coming in from the outside? How do we show that we're actually achieving that and we're moving in that direction? So I am hoping that most people are here in our case management, in our related services, and that most people are not these three guys here. But I also know that we've probably seen these three guys at some time in our careers. Has no idea what's going on the whole time, says he's going to help, but he's not. And then my favorite, the person who shows up, disappears, and then doesn't come back until the end, and then asks, what's going on? How's everything going? I've written my goal, and then months later comes back and says, are you achieving the goal? Like, no, maybe. And so making sure that we're all on this left-hand side guy. Does 99%, 100% of the work. I'm going to switch gears a little bit to the communication piece of it, using technology. And I know that's another question that came up frequently. It's like, how do I coordinate with other people? How do I set up these meetings? How do I make sure people come? And a lot of things that I can't give you the perfect answer today. I'm sorry. I've never been able to achieve that myself. And sometimes it's just how things go, and we try to do the best things that we can within that space. But what we can do is we can provide some options, some ideas that maybe you've heard of before, maybe you haven't heard of before. One of those ideas is using an instant messaging or chat software kind of function. And a lot of teams do use these, a lot of districts do use these. I'm not sure specifically what Washington County uses, doesn't use, but these are things that could be advocated for in the future if it's something that sounds of interest to you and could be helpful in your jobs. What these things can be used for is to connect with team members. At the very basic, it helps to connect without all of the piles of email that go back and forth, and having that inbox just fill up, and then it gets overwhelming, we see the big pile, and we don't ever want to look at that again. What you can do with this kind of software is utilize private groups for individuals involved with specific cases, specific teams. So for example, instead of a pile of emails where you have, say, 10,000 emails in your inbox, and you've got to go through, okay, here's Steven's IEP, and here's Sally's IEP, and here's this other thing that I have to deal with, and then you're like going through and trying to figure out who's what and who does which part of that, and that can be a nightmare. And again, kind of is very aversive when we're trying to do our jobs and managing those specific cases and those specific pieces of that. So what this can do is bring it all together in one area where you can have different teams developed and have, for example, you can have Sally's IEP, and that's all that conversation is based on, all that's around. What this does is allows for quick communication. So again, rather than emails or texting, some things that may not even be HIPAA or FERPA compliant. So texting isn't always fit in that area. So it's always important to know, what am I doing? Am I maintaining the security of the files, for one thing? It's centralized. It's in one area, so I don't have to go through combing through the emails. I don't have to go through combing through all the files, the texts, everything else. This is all in one space. Conversation is targeted, so it's focused on this one specific thing, and you can have multiple teams, so you know that this is all about, Steve's IEP rather than Steve. We're going to talk about Steve's IEP here, but we also are on the same team for somebody else, so we're going to talk about that, and things get lost in translation. And I just say, check the district policies. What does your district use? Maybe they don't use anything, maybe they have something already in place. And this is more of an administration thing, but I talked about HIPAA and FERPA compliance. One of the things that's important to know about some of these softwares is that they are HIPAA and FERPA compliant if they're used appropriately. And one of the things that needs to be done in that regard is to make sure that a business associate agreement has been signed with the district and the company, which says that the company providing the service is promising to let folks know if there's a data breach. So that in those cases where something were to happen, they get hacked or anything like that, they will let you know, and they will also make an effort to let others know where the data could have been compromised. So that's a very important aspect of that. It's not necessarily your problem, but making sure that when you're using some of these technologies, that if you're using them personally, that that's something that's in place. Different kinds of softwares that utilize this. One is Slack. I don't know if anybody's heard of that before. It's something we use with our lab. It can provide a lot of those opportunities that we talked about. So you can create channels, you can create projects, and you can have each one of those with specific individuals involved. You can also do direct messages, so if you have a question for somebody directly, you can talk to them. But one of the cool parts about it is, so this one here is for the marketing team. It's very much like Facebook or social media. You just type in a message, goes to the team. Anybody who is involved with this or is logged in can see it instantly. You can also use a phone-based app that is tied into that, so it takes out the need for doing the texting. It takes out the need for logging into your emails to kind of coordinate these things. And in addition, you can do file sharing. So if you're trying to send documentation back and forth, if you're trying to communicate those kinds of things, it's very quick, it's very instantaneous, and it's also secure, like I said, when it has that business associate agreement involved. Others that you might be more familiar with, Microsoft Teams, as part of the Microsoft package. It's very similar. So looks a little different, but same kind of thing. You've got the operations, you've got your specific teams, you've got your chat-based function, file sharing, and then a lot of different ways to kind of modify that to meet whatever the needs are that you have. And then the last one is probably one that you've all heard of, Google Hangouts. So it doesn't have quite the functionality of the other two, but it is something that can be used. I will caution with this, though, is that there is a free version of any of these. And so making sure that if you're wanting to send that private data, that you're using the paid version. So if there's a district provided one, or if there's one that's advocated for and does get eventually provided by the district, that is in place. You can use these for more general types of conversations that don't involve specific student data and things like that, and it can be very helpful for that, which I'll touch on in a few minutes. But just making sure, like when you see this, like, oh, I have access to Google Hangouts, it might not be the secure version. And then we get onto that. What can I do if I don't have access to those? Oh, Derek, we don't have that here. And that looks wonderful, but how do I do anything if I can't do what you're telling me to do? And so I thought of a couple of things. One thing is, at the very least, you can set up targeted folders in your inbox. So just a way to organize files a little bit better. So we often get to that point where it's like, oh, I'll just let everything come into the inbox, and then you see 10,000 emails in there, and you're like, I'm never going to look at that again. But you could set up folders. For example, Steve's IEP, and then you have everything, and there's ways to set up rules and things where those will kind of move themselves directly to those folders. And you can mark them in the inbox and say, always send these ones to this particular folder and things like that. So it's a little clunky. It's not as great or as helpful or useful as these other software packages, but it is a way to help kind of manage some of those files or those emails that are coming through. Another one, and kind of in the spirit of sharing information with one another, because again, there's a lot of really good ideas, and I don't think we always use the resources that we have available to us. We often feel very isolated in some of these roles. So being a special education teacher, you're often stuck like in your classroom doing your thing, managing your cases, and you don't think about like, oh, there's a special education teacher down the road who might have an answer to this question that I have about this particular student or this particular behavior or whatever. And so sometimes there might be opportunities to share that with one another, but by communicating a little bit more frequently or finding ways to have those outlets, it can be a really nice thing to show like, there's a great intervention here, it's just not getting out there to the rest of us. And so if there's a district listserv or even those blast emails that come out, like the ones that came out today about the venue change or the ones that have been coming out about this being put on, can be very helpful to kind of share those things. Like, I have a question about this specific behavior, does anybody have anything? Or in the case of protocols and things like we talked about before, does anybody have a protocol for this kind of thing? So sharing those can be very helpful. And then the last thing is, I did mention there are free versions of things like Teams and Hangouts, and you can use that in that same case, that same way. Set up teams, maybe special education teams, or even within your own specialty, occupational therapy, physical therapy, etc., have team ideas where you can also share back and forth. Because again, I know that everybody's not meeting all the time, everybody's not face to face, but if you need that quick, hey, I've got a question about this speech thing, I haven't quite seen it before, does anybody have an idea here that could be helpful? So having a group set up for that can be really helpful to share ideas with one another. The last thing I will touch on are conflicts. And I'm not going to get into like the big things like if somebody's touching somebody inappropriately or anything like that, there's district procedures for that. What I'm talking about is conflicts between team members. And one of the things that I see frequently is this idea that, one, we're not necessarily on the same page around how to do a certain intervention or what specific goals we might have for a student, or for example, what speech modality do we want to use to help this student? Are we going to focus on written, verbal, sign, and being able to come to an agreement on that? And then kind of in the more concerning areas, like when required IEP services are not being completed or being provided, either on time or at all, and making sure, because that's a big part of that liability piece. And I hate to be around litigation and kind of focusing on that, but that's a big reality of the work that we do, is that lawyers come in, advocates come in, people want to see data, people want to see that things are actually being done if they say they're going to be done, and that these services are being provided. So those are common conflicts that'll come up. One thing that often we run into is, how do we actually deal with these conflicts when they are occurring? And especially like when people aren't showing up on time. Well, one, reach out to the related service member directly. We all know from each of our own areas that we're busy. We have a lot of things on our plate. We have a lot of things that we're focusing on, a lot of things that we're trying to manage on a minute-to-minute, hour-to-hour, day-to-day basis, and sometimes things get lost. And so discussing that directly with the provider, not going over their head, not going somewhere else, not complaining around the water cooler, not doing any of those things, because those things increase that frustration. From a mental health standpoint, I know what that's like. So, okay, this team member's not doing it, and so we go into our little groups and we're like, I hate this team member, they're horrible, they do all this stuff, and they never show up. And it's nice to vent from time to time, but that doesn't really achieve the thing that we want to achieve, which is getting that person to do what they're supposed to be doing. And again, recognizing there could be another reason behind that rather than them just blowing off the situation. So discussing the needs. What are the needs of the classroom? What are the needs of the student? What are the legal requirements that are involved here? This is written in the IEP, therefore it needs to be done, it needs to be met. And then compromise. So if there is a scheduling issue, it's just that the OT can't show up at this time, even though they originally thought they could, because something's come up. Talk about those things. Make sure that the schedule is modified to meet those needs. If it does come to a point, and I mean, this, in an ideal world, it would all work itself out in these kind of individual one-on-one or team conversations directly with one another. Sometimes it needs to be escalated. It needs to go to the immediate supervisor. It needs to go to a special education coordinator, and ultimately the special education director. And I'm also aware that sometimes that's not, very easy. Everybody's busy. Everybody's got things going on. But those are kind of the ways to escalate it. But don't start there. Start with the direct communication. And then I also put just a caveat, follow the district guidelines on conflict resolution. So those things are always available. If you don't know what those are, obviously talk with your immediate supervisor, find out what those are for your role, and then follow those as far as, escalating. All right, I've had enough time with me talking, and I want everybody else to be talking at this point. So what I want people to do is I get into small groups. I know people are kind of at tables. You're kind of on your own here, so you can join in with maybe this table over here. And then we want to have you kind of discuss a little bit amongst yourselves a couple of vignettes that we've created, just kind of talk about these issues around case management and conflict resolution. So take a minute to get into your group, and I will switch over to the next vignette here. I like that. If you want to.
Yeah, you can ask if you want.
I wouldn't do it on the field.
I think we have our teams.
All right. Just get on a minute.
Yeah.
I need to take it.
Yeah.
All right. It looks like we have our teams. Everybody's kind of gotten to know one another. Probably already know each other. The first vignette I want you to discuss, we'll give you about 5 to 10 minutes to talk about this, is around the student Ashley. Ashley is a 10-year-old Native American female who just moved into the Washington County School District. She was recently diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder by a community psychologist. Her behaviors include noncompliance, elopement, and minor physical aggression when asked to complete tasks she does not understand or during unexpected transitions. She was homeschooled until now. She has had some in-home BCBA supports in the past, but no additional special education supports or prior IEP. She has minimal difficulties with her activities of daily living, or ADLs, toileting, putting on, taking off clothing, and she can complete them with minimal support, so mostly independent on those. What I want you to do in your groups is I want you to discuss these questions. What supports do you think might be necessary for Ashley? Who's part of your standard IEP team? Who would you pull into this team? Who else would you want to involve in this process? What evaluations might you want to see? How can you communicate needs with the team? What strategies could you employ to expedite the process? And how would you like others to be participating in this process? And for those of you who aren't case managers, who haven't been in that role before, kind of put yourself in those shoes. What would you do in that scenario? What are the things that you would like to see? So go ahead and take some time. We'll just kind of scatter around, kind of listen in on some of the conversations, discuss these questions, and then we'll come back. We'll go to the second vignette. We'll have a group discussion, and then we'll get a break.
come back to the presentation. Do we have any groups?
Yeah.
All right, we're going to come back to the presentation. Do we have any groups that had any interesting insights to how to best support Ashley? I think we've heard a couple of really interesting things going around, so if anybody wants to share anything their group has come up with.
Do we know that they have a classification in special education? So we felt like there's things that you want to start rolling out and seeing how they're doing in their personal setting, and start pulling in people onto that team and organizing a team to help facilitate those students.
That sounds good.
Yeah, a lot of it needs really do, as she said, depend on like the evaluations you have and like what you see yourself. What the reality can look different from what is on the documents you receive when Ashley moves in.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really important to be thinking about it. Like, what are the specific needs? What are the, is this person eligible? Things like that. And that's one of the things why I put by a community psychologist. You can be diagnosed with something, but not necessarily meet the classification requirements or the need for additional services.
And I think a big one is going in and actually observing and seeing what the student is really capable of. Because sometimes they're just refusing to do the things on the list that they're really capable of. So.
Exactly.
And that's like a big thing.
Yeah, I think that's like super important, because especially like, we're doing all this like writing goals and all of these things, but we still haven't seen the child. You know what I mean? So I think like that's definitely one of the first things. Yeah.
And I think with any behavior, you've probably got to build rapport with her. You've got you can rely on all the reports you want, but this is a new setting. These are new people. These are new surroundings. So you might as well bring her in and figure out what her incentives are, what her reinforcers are, and make a list of those 10 reinforcers while you're building rapport. And before she starts eloping, before you demand, cleaning up, picking up might be the first demand you ever put on her. Put it in your coat. Going to lunch. Doing the simple reinforcers, see what she can and can't do, and then if you like had to use an experience with writing, every time that happens, it's the trigger, So if we know every time we talk about writing, we're going to get in a low. It's saying, hey, I'm frustrated with this, so what can we do before that happens? He was talking about some great strategies about prompting, counting down, saying we're going to make a change, not shifting on a dime, but just slowly making the shift and letting her process, So, but I think you've got to build rapport, find the major reinforcers, and figure out what the triggers are, and then see if you can actually see the triggers in your classroom, and then you know how to bounce it back. So
Going over some of those antecedent strategies, for the before the fact, and also just kind of getting a sense of the individual and building that rapport. Definitely important. Thank you. Any other thoughts that came up?
I think we are kind of coming from a totally different direction. All this makes a lot of sense, what you're saying, but what we are looking at is the student is moving into a classroom with that already happening. And Andrea will expand on that.
Put you on the spot.
Okay, this is something truly that I've been thinking about and I'm super passionate about. Since we're special educators, let's figure this out.
Yeah.
I came from general education into a special education setting because I had an Ashley in my class who destroyed my class every day, who took my time away from 26 other first graders. So somehow, somewhere, we have got to figure out, this is great that Ashley can come to school and be in a classroom and we can find all the antecedents in the world and we can, but that takes a minute, and we can build rapport, and we can do all these things, and we can have a team, and we can have an OT come assess and a PT come assess. In the meantime, for that 2 months it takes us to test this child, what are the other supports we're putting into place for that teacher? Because it's not okay for one student, I'm sorry, to ruin it for the rest of them, to be very blunt. It's not okay. So somehow we have got to figure out in our team here and how to make changes so we can better support the special ed teacher and the gen ed teacher. You know, we've seen this time and time again where there isn't enough support. The support is the principal down in the office, far away. By the time they get there, get the phone call, the kid's out of the neighborhood already, and you can't leave because you're with your other students. So I think, you know, obviously we have teams, we put things together, but in reality, what can we really do to make that better?
Because the classroom teacher should be part of the team and we should
Yes.
support her or him. And not just go into our little areas of.
Well, I think the answer to that may be, or a partial answer to that question would be the continuum of services, right?
Right.
It's not this or that.
Right.
It's not here or there. It's anywhere in between here, right? And so I think you start with the student close by so that if we're the specialists, right, and we're the ones that's going to be lending the support, that we find a time, like say a large group instruction, where they're sitting at the rug, you know, where there's not a lot of demands. It's just, and come in for 5 minutes and say, wow, you did a great job when you come back, right? And you build 10 minutes and then you build 15. It is a process, and while we are doing the research over the 2 months to get her acclimated, it's all about rapport.
Absolutely.
It's all about rapport.
But when you have a first grader who's coming to school with so much trauma that all they want to do is stab you with a pencil all day long, you can try to build rapport in all the world, but until they can feel comfortable at school, it's not.
But how do they do it? But yeah, right. So
and
it's our job to help create that.
So are you guys understaffed like we're understaffed? Because we get a student like this, and our 20 other kids on our caseload that we're supposed to work with that day go out the window because we're in a classroom with this one student. Because historically, children that have behavior like this, even without an IEP, SPED is called on historically, right? So I think there's some flaws. I think we have a lot of flaws that we have to figure out. It's fine and dandy to say do this, do this, do this, but until you're actually in the classroom as the gen ed teacher, I don't know, what's it? Thanks for throwing me under the bus.
It's liberating.
Really,
yeah.
It feels good to say that.
Honestly, I've needed to say that. Like,
yes.
I can't be the only one in this room who feels that way. And if I am, I'll,
You're not the only one.
these guys were just shaking their heads.
So I think like the solution to a problem like that there's not like a series of special techniques or a platform you can get on that waves the problem away. Although these are incredibly helpful tools that Derek, Chad, and Annie are giving us.
Right.
Like that's a resource issue.
Right.
That no conference can.
But who has, in our district or any district, who has the resources for that?
Very lucky classrooms.
and you and Barbie.
I mean, for that situation with like an Ashley, and Ashley deserves to get to be that classroom. And she deserves to have the services. She deserves to get the attention she requires. And it's clear that a single teacher is not equipped to give Ashley that
Ashley, not only Ashley, but
the
the other
26 other kids.
Because there's not just an Ashley, there's 20 other students, and hopefully that teacher would be given enough resources for an Ashley to have an RBT
They're
at the very
definitely
start.
not. Especially since she's not on site yet. I mean, we're going to have her in a classroom for 2 months.
Right.
I wish there was a way to say, you're coming with a diagnosis of autism already. We already know you work with the WCSD. We already know you are non-compliant and you elope and you're aggressive. You need to give us 45 days to create our own testing to give you the right setting. Because in the meantime, we're having a classroom teacher hang on by the seat of their pants, honestly. So sorry, that was.
Oh, I like that you bring that up because that's definitely something I've heard a lot. I mean, my dad was a classroom teacher for a long time, and he always had students that would come in, and when they're disruptive, when they're causing, having some of these kinds of behaviors, it's the same thing. It's like, what do I do? How do I work within that boundary of, I have a student that we need to address behaviors with and things like that, but I also have this caseload or these other students that also need to have, as much individual and ability to achieve their level of education that they're, supposed to be achieving. How do I balance all of that? And I don't think we'll be able to solve that today in this discussion, but I like that conversation is being had, and I like kind of what I've been hearing back and forth. And I think that one of the things that we can do, and one, at the local level, is have these kinds of conversations more frequently. How do we talk with one another around this? How do we bring this as a group to the levels that can affect change in that? So I think having an individual voice is one thing, but then now you're hearing like, I hear support in the greater area, and that's one thing we can use some of these other technologies for too. It's not just the sharing of ideas around like, here's an intervention I can use, but what are things that we can do, or what kinds of council meetings can we go to? What kinds of district meetings can we go to? I mean, we're in the boardroom here, one of the boardrooms, and how can we start affecting that change from the lowest levels to the highest levels, and kind of working from that direction. But I wish I could solve the problem like right here now and be like, here's the magic, thing that we can do to make that work. But it's definitely a pervasive issue.
Well, and that issue is very real, right? I think that the one thing I've seen though is like I have seen some schools, they get this information, they know they might be looking at something really challenging, and so you'll see that rapport start with the parent very early on to try to avoid that us versus them kind of mentality that might roll out, right? And then from there, like if that rapport can be built, to start to have those conversations right up front with how do we want to structure this? There's nothing that says that student has to come to school for an entire day. There's nothing that says that they can't provide some special report time. So some schools I've seen do a really good job of getting the transfer student with a somewhat overwhelming kind of profile. And then before it even starts, they're already sitting down, including the parent as a part of that team, hopefully building rapport and getting the parent on board with the student's interest is our main interest, and she's been at homeschool, and we have these things. What community resources are you already using? What do we have here at the school? And, Mom, how do you feel about us maybe easing into this a little bit more? And how don't you feel about that? And then sometimes you can already start to kind of create a place where, right, you can gain a baseline that's not throwing someone in the deep end of the pool.
So what I'm hearing is kind of having that community outreach in a bit as well. So connecting one with the home, getting a sense of what the resources is that they already have access to, what are the things they're already doing in the home, and is there a chance of maybe shifting services slowly where maybe they can kind of ramp up their ability to access the school itself. So it's given that Ashley, in this case, has already been doing homeschool, is there still a space to be able to do maybe some homeschool work in conjunction with the school?
Yeah, or are there resources they're not even aware of if they're new to the area? Is there a special program or school or something that they'd be more open to that didn't even know existed?
Sure.
Sometimes I think, I know I do this. I get stuck in a first in, first out mentality. Like the way I prioritize testing, how I move a student through the process is just in the order that they come in, and I make sure everybody has plenty of time. But maybe in some of these situations, we need more of a emergency room mentality, like where we push the process. Because in reality, even though it generally takes a couple months to get this process, if we were all really pushing and we were all on, and everybody on the team was on board, there's really no reason we couldn't get everything done in the IEP done in 2 weeks. Get those supports in place a lot quicker than we do. And that's not easy, and it's, it takes an extreme situation to do that, but we can do things a lot faster than we do, I believe.
I've done this enough years though. I know that if I get a report like that, I've had people out of the Utah State Hospital, and my first inclination is to go like that, and I go, and all of a sudden I start feeling all these emotions that they just wrote in that report. I'm envisioning the worst case scenario, and I'm already predisposing exactly the way that boy's going to act when he walks into my classroom, into my school, and we're going to be on our edge. And so then I meet with the parents, but then I have to take a step back and go, guess what? That was then, this is now. Every child wants to behave appropriately. Now they may have some maladaptive behaviors, that's true, but guess what? Every child still wants to behave. Every child still wants to be loved by their teacher. And sometimes you can just say, this is a great opportunity to start over, right? And nobody knows your past behaviors. Nobody knows, you know. And set the parents at ease, because she's thinking the whole world can see that he's autistic on his chest and that he's broadcasting this bad behavior. Nobody's thinking that. Nobody knows unless we say, guess what, Johnny's coming. He's coming from the state hospital, and guess what else, right? And then you tell the general teacher that, and they go, well, how am I going to manage that? And they start this negative loop. When we say, you know what, we're going to do our best. We're going to gradually move this kid through this. We're going to build rapport. We're going to love this boy and this girl, or whatever, you know. And there's going to be some burps, absolutely, right?
Sure.
But we don't know what they're going to be in this new setting yet. We can't predispose. We can look for these things, but if we project them, you're absolutely. If we're waiting for them, we'll get exactly what we're looking for.
You bring up a really good
Oftentimes
point.
I get kids and I go, I don't see this behavior. Why don't I see that behavior? Because I'm not looking for it, right? And I'm not gonna. And since I know it's a possibility, I'm already thinking ahead of the student thinking. But if that does happen, how will I respond? So thinking proactive versus reactive. I think reading a report like this, we become reactive, right? I think we should become proactive and go, there could be some chances that could be happening. Maybe he's looking for a new start too. Maybe she's looking for a new start. It's totally a maladaptive behavior. We got to shape it for sure. It's not going to fix in 2 months, even if we have the right testing done. We still have to build a report. We still have to find the reinforcers. We still have to learn where his triggers are, or her triggers. So the process is going to be the same.
Yeah, I really like that. I kind of like, it's just these assumptions that we as humans, we tend to have, you know, the minute we read something. And it also comes like, you know, with the experiences that y'all as special educators have had in the past. So it's very easy to think about these things, and I think it's okay. But like you said, you know, maybe framing that thought of mine to, you know what, let's give this a shot. Let's see, you know, maybe a change in setting is really what that child needs. And maybe you do all the right things to set your class up to kind of create this opportunity for the student to engage. And therefore you're like, yeah, I'm not seeing these behaviors that I saw in the report. And it seems like, you know, a fresh start is what was essentially needed, or maybe a change in things, a change in routine, a change in structure.
Because what kids can tell whether they can smell whether you believe in them or not.
Yeah.
You know, if you're sitting there expecting behavior, they've felt that their whole life. You know, so if you go, man, this is a new what? I get a different chance. Yeah, this is your big deal. This is your big day, man.
Yeah.
Right? And I trust you. You know. Maladaptive behaviors, chemical imbalances, those are things that we can't always shift around or not control over. But we can certainly shape it by how we portray how we trust this kid. If we portray that they're going to behave, why does he just do it for you and not for me? Well, I don't know. I'm not looking for the problem. Right? I mean, it's not always true, but it can be true.
I totally agree with that.
It's like a flash forward moment.
I've had students like that. I totally agree with that. I think absolutely every kid coming in deserves a fresh start. And I think if we are educators, that is what we do. What I'm saying is when Ashley actually gets in the classroom and these behaviors start happening, we are not quick enough. We are not quick enough to support. We are just saying to the classroom teacher, well, they're placed in your class and they don't have a diagnosis. So until that happens, you have to take care of that. Yeah. Speeding the process through is good, but logistically 2 weeks in a classroom with an Ashley is pretty traumatic for the teacher and the other students in the classroom. So there's got to be something else.
I just want to say I work with quite a number of special ed teachers, and they all do what you say. They are amazing. They look at these students with open hearts and open minds, and they, what you said, everybody here does it.
Absolutely.
But I am
This is not an indictment of what we
so
don't do.
I
This is
think
what
our
we do.
problem that we tried to bring up was the logistical thing. How do you actually support that kid plus 26 others? That was all it was about.
Sure.
Yeah, and am I the only one who's been a gen ed teacher?
No, and I think they both exist together, right? One idea is there has to be more resources, there has to be, right, lobbying for policies to change, so that's all provided. And yeah, if that's the reality, it's completely overwhelming in how you manage it, right? And then there's the other side of, if you are trying to manage it, or if there were some things that you can do, if it ends up not being that type of situation, you know, what does that look like, right? And so I think they both exist together.
Right,
It's
because
like,
I'm in
there's things
their
you can do
classroom,
to
I
not
turn the
exacerbate
tables over
it or
in my
not,
desk, in my classroom.
Yes.
Right, because I've had a kid totally clear my whole shelf and found all my desk in the middle of the room, and I stood outside the room, and the principal said, "When are you gonna stop this?" And I said, "When he's done."
And that's
He's
really
not
hard.
hurting anybody, he's not hurting himself, and I've evacuated the room.
And that's really
I'm
hard though,
waiting.
as a gen ed teacher, you have to evacuate your room daily and take kids to the office because they got hit by an iPad. Do you know what I mean? Like when that one child was in there, I guess I'm just coming at it as a different, and that's why I went into special education.
And
is because we have to make changes, because it's okay to say to a classroom teacher, we're doing these things, and we're gonna come in and find out what the antecedent is, and you're in there for how long? Figuring out what the antecedent is, and then you're like, oh, I'm gonna go back to my classroom now. Like as a special ed teacher, you can't stay in a classroom all day, and sometimes we have to, but then our other caseload gets dropped. So I just think we have to be realistic. All these things are pretty.
This is a presentation, obviously, right?
Yes.
And so, but the reality of it is, whether you're a special ed teacher or a general ed teacher, someone's room's being trashed.
Yes. And someone is having to pick up the pieces.
Which takes you back to the basics. You still have to build rapport. You still have to find out what the incentives are. You still have to go back to the basics and figure it out. And that takes time.
Absolutely. And I want to say, we do hear you. We do hear you, just like kind of like you have all of this like 26 odd kids, and then you have this kid who needs legit all of your attention that you distribute across this 26, right? I'm going to come back to that, but we do have another question at the back.
Another question, I think that could help is maybe like some more behavior training for the gen ed teachers or for the like special education teachers. Like a lot of special education teachers don't really even know how to like deal with behaviors or like what they're looking for, whatever. I think that would really help. Like the Aspen training, I think that all the gen ed teachers should take that. Like I feel like that'd be helpful for everyone, and then that kind of gives the teacher a leg up on dealing with an athlete and giving her more resources before someone else can come in.
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion. And I think overall this conversation is really helpful because like we closely work with the district, so like these are things that we can have in our discussions.
And in addition to that, I mean, that's one of the reasons the district brings in some of the community partners like ourselves as consultants. I mean, obviously there's not a lot of us to go around, but that's one of the moves that districts have made, is to pull in teams from the outside, partner with the University of Utah and other programs that are similar to try to bring in additional supports.
Yeah. So we do have two questions. Yeah. We're going to give you a turn and then we can come back to Kate.
I was going to say, sometimes too that starts, and I've tried to reach out to our local university and education program to provide more behavioral training prior to graduation, prior to completing their schooling, because that too can lead to a short-lived education career, because my first few years I wasn't prepared for all this. Right, and so then I don't feel like I'm doing the job that I was trained to do, and then I can go and do this somewhere else. But I think too, being at a university, that we need to have that voice there in regards to what training we're giving our undergrads that are preparing to go in and teach.
Right.
Behavior training and understanding beyond, a 2-credit class or like one thing. It's got to be seen. Anybody who's dealt with behavior. The only way to learn behavior is by fire, right? And that's just to jump in and do. And so to have that be a part of, like, because then our expectations are, our behaviors can meet, right? Like if I get in the classroom, I've got some tough kids, I've experienced this, it's predictable, these are my resources, just have to be proactive with it. So I think there's some things out there that we can begin to kind of do. I'm still pushing the emails to all, like at Dixie, in regards to please meet with me. I'd love to talk with you. I think it'd be excellent for your graduates to have that extra credit or certification when they graduate with their license. Your license to go out and teach, so they have some understanding of how to manage behaviors.
Yeah, just like addressing the systemic concerns and the underlying concerns, right? Yeah, I agree. Keaton, you
my question was actually similar to that. Like, how as we, as a SPED department, able to make ideas like Lex's of like let's get the gen ed teachers into Aspen trainings and get them more behavioral trainings. Like, how could we as a SPED department make any ideas like those come into big word that means we have the fruition. Thank you.
I think Holly's very open. I mean, obviously, Ryan can have it in his team meetings, can talk to Holly and say, the principals ought to go through Aspen.
Yep.
It starts at the very top, and principals ought to sit through an Aspen training and to go through the processing, because as I go to every school, I go through the Aspen stuff and they said, well, we have students, so I'll just fix the problems, get it out of here. And I'm going, we can't do that. You know what? We've got to figure out what the trigger is before we put it back in the cage in that regular ed classroom, because that's not fair to that gen ed teacher. So it starts at the top. Ryan can talk to Holly. Holly can present it to the administrators. The administrators then, and I've always said to every teacher, to every principal, said the best gift you can give your faculty is behavior training.
Yes.
And tell that the general ed have to own their behaviors first. As soon as they hit a certain threshold, then sometimes gen ed people, I'm not saying, will say, he's no longer mine, he's yours, right? So I think gen ed owns it to some degree, because even in the referral process, right, in filling out the 2 referral interventions, there's got to be some things done and checked off for an extended period of time before they can hand it over to us. And we can be consulting in the process, right? But Ryan, you could give that idea to start at the principals and work it down, right? And then say, make sure one of your staffing meetings at the beginning of every year is an Aspen video or something like that. I mean, we have to watch, what's that, the wellness stuff. We have to watch that stuff. We have to be trained on ESL, right? You know, ESL kids in your classroom, they should mandate that every staff member have some Aspen training or watch the Aspen videos. Because until the general ed understand the process of antecedents and thinking through it, right? You know,
or
they've
get
got
subs so they can go through the entire day training.
What's that? Yeah.
Get subs so they can go.
Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
They need to be in the fire with us.
Yeah,
right?
and even like antecedent consequence, that ABC thing, it's not something that needs to be limited to like a special ed like arena. It's actually supposed to be used class-wide, school-wide, system-wide. So essentially, you know, taking in the general ed portions of it too.
Well, this is just exactly the kind of conversation that I thought would be helpful to start, you know, and kind of having this training be part of the impetus of that, getting people talking about what are the needs, what are the things, and also recognizing like there are a lot of really good ideas out here. You brought up some good stuff about having people be trained in Aspen or whatever other behavioral techniques and having that come out, you know, and where can we start with that? And so we kind of saw a little bit of that happen right now. Is there was a concern, there's some discussion around that, and we had some ability to see like who can we talk to about that. I'm also mindful of the time. I want to give everybody about a 9-minute break or so. So please feel free to take a little bit of a break, and we will come back and start with the data collection.
All right. We're gonna move on to the second part of our presentation, all about data collection. Yay!
Awesome. Thank you all for bearing. We're supposed to start at 3, but what's a PD without little tech issues, right? So, yeah?
Is there any moment in this presentation where we get to check under our chairs for something? Sure.
I'll give you some. Okay, so can you all hear me? I feel like through the mask it might be hard. So if you can hear, raise your hand and I'll talk louder. So this portion is actually going to talk about data collection, but before that, of course, like Derek mentioned, trying to fill this session with humor because it's 3 o'clock, it's a Friday. I mean, who wants to be here anyway?
Show of hands.
Who wants to be here?
Awesome.
Actually, I'm going to be honest, I'm having a better time than I thought.
Yeah, you thought this would be like
I'm
this
sorry.
story. Yeah.
Very good.
Definitely doesn't sound
Who's
good.
having a worse time? You're excused.
Okay, so interestingly, I just want to share a study that was done, right? So Wonest and Hagenberg did a study in 2010, and what they did was they did like a survey in 2 school districts in Texas. And of course, they wanted to hire like 104 teachers, but only 36 SPED teachers actually participated, right? And they really wanted to know, what do SPED teachers' days look like? What does a typical day look like, right? So, this kind of study kind of came out because, SPED educators do literally all of these things, like content area, instruction, progress monitoring, data collection, parent collaboration, consultation. So the list is endless. So they were like, SPED teachers. So SPED teachers would be self-contained resource teachers, behavior techs, like special behavior classes. So what they did was they asked teachers to list all of the things that they did for an entire workday. And of course, I hope this will work. But the previous one was like, are you kidding? Entire workday? Because they only considered 8 to 4, and they totally forgot about the after 4 hours. How many of y'all actually like go home and still work? Let's do a show of hands to be real.
And the rest of you just don't go home, right?
Yeah, we know some teachers who will stay. Yeah, so it's like they forgot the after 4 schedule, but they still focused on the 8 to 4. And what they found out was these are some of the things that teachers would do: academic instruction, instructional support, paperwork, love that, discipline, supervision, consulting, personal time, which would essentially mean checking your personal emails. I don't know if y'all even have the time for that. Answering personal calls. I don't know.
Bathroom break.
Bathroom breaks. Apparently personal time. Yeah. So, planning, IP meetings, assessment, and non-academic instruction, a plethora of things that, SPED educators do. And you probably can't see. So these are kind of like the definitions, what they wanted to consider personal time versus non-personal time. But outside that, the results indicated that this is kind of how the responsibilities are distributed. So a majority of the time is spent doing academic instruction, instructional support, paperwork. Kind of, a moderate time doing discipline, supervision, consulting, bathroom breaks, and other responsibilities. And the least amount of time was spent with the IP meetings, the assessments, and the non-academic instruction. So, kind of reflecting a little bit, let's take like 1 minute. Does this closely map onto how your day is kind of spread? Even if you're Gen Ed or SPED, right? You may not have like IP meetings, or maybe you're kind of trying to work towards getting one of your students into a SPED class. So maybe you do have IP meetings, but does this kind of sum up how your days are distributed? Pretty accurate?
I think behavior management is high.
Behavior management is high.
Communication, helping
Yeah.
people communicate and behave and self-regulate.
Yeah.
That's
So kind of the discipline portion of it, right? Takes majority of the role. And it depends on like, the intensity of behaviors in the students in your class. So again, just to illustrate, you can see almost like 50% of the time is taken for the first 4: academic instruction, instructional support, paperwork, and discipline, like you said. So that's like half of your day. So I thought this was just helpful because it goes to show you're not alone. And this is kind of the trend. And almost sounds like a system issue if you need to spend time doing other things that you wish your kids would benefit. So yeah. Did they miss something? Did they actually miss something?
I mean, that's a pretty long list.
Yeah, but they did miss something.
Did you miss something?
Did they miss something in their list of things that Yeah.
Oh.
Data collection.
Yeah, data. Yeah.
The whole presentation is about.
Awesome. Yes.
The only thing I can take with me home. Oh.
Yeah. But do you know why they missed data collection?
Because they don't take it.
Because that's not their role. Data collection is not their role, but data management and making sure the data is collected is actually the special ed teacher's role. So that kind of goes back to what Jake was talking about. The SPED teacher is supposed to manage and make sure the data is being collected, but you're not the one who's collecting it. So
On paper.
on paper, this person is supposed to have a really scary laugh, but totally missed the point because we're having internet issues. But
That laugh is iconic.
yeah, so that's what they missed. Data collection. You're not supposed to collect the data. So yeah, so essentially the SPED teacher's role would be data collection manager, right? You're like the specialist in data collection. You know how to do it, but it's not your responsibility in the class because you have all of these other things that need your attention. So therefore you need to have people who know how to collect the data, who are specialized in those roles, in those tasks, to collect it for you, and then essentially you gather, you manage, you put them on those progress monitoring sheets, you update those folders, update those files. So just to contrast, and I know this is not the case with every teacher's classroom, right? So I think just knowing this will give you a better idea of if you want to kind of recalibrate, regroup, this will kind of give you some place to start and think about. So a couple of the survey responses actually talked more about we need to know what to collect. How do we collect? How do we measure? How do we graph? And taking all of these responses into consideration, we kind of touch a little bit on it. But every time someone told me, show me the data, and every time I had $1 for someone told me to show me the data, I don't know where I'll be.
Here.
Yeah. So data collection is serious business, right? It sounds very complex, it sounds very scary, and that's because we rely so much on the data. And it's very systematic, and hence, if there is no system, it can be really, really messy when it comes to those deadlines that you're looking at. So why is it important? Because if it's not there, just make numbers up and present it, right? No, we can't do that. Don't do that. So your data is really going to be critical in making decisions for your kids, right? All those IP goals that you spend so much time working on, getting them implemented and kind of using your data to base further directions or future directions. So, okay, I'm gonna start bathroom training for the student, but we're first toothbrushing. I wanna get to toothbrushing, but first we need to make sure he knows what a toothbrush is, right? So all of those things need data. They're gonna be backed by data, so towards the end, your child's gonna be able to brush their teeth independently. So kind of making those educational decisions, you need the data, you can't guess. You're not doing justice to the child if you guess, right? And we're gonna have angry parents, and that kind of leads to litigation, advocates, and just makes it so complicated. And you have all these positive feelings that you want to support this child, but when they get kind of grouped in with advocates coming in and saying you're not doing a great job, we need X, Y, Z, we're not happy at all, no matter what you do. So it makes it really hard for your job as a special ed teacher, because as SPED teachers, we're so emotionally connected to our kids, like that's a little bubble, and we want them to succeed, but then when we have people coming and telling us you're not doing a job, that kind of makes us feel sour, right? So data will solve most of your problems, and make sure you sleep well every night. So who's responsible for data collection? I don't know. Just gonna hide. So again, the key is
the special education teachers are the data managers. But we have our OT folks, our PT folks, our SLP folks. They are really the masters of their own fields, and they know how to address a concern, how to proceed, how to collect the data, what to collect the data on, and how do we present them, right? So SPED educators or SPED teachers, these are your folks to go to, right? So it's almost going to be like the case manager. You gotta manage all these pieces. And that takes time, that can be frustrating, and I think collaborating, communicating is like number one. Rapport building, working as a team is your number one. So, you know, some of y'all do have RBTs that work in your classes. Some of y'all have paras that work in your classes. So I think it's super important to highlight that special education teachers are the case managers. Then you have your specialists who are the OT, PT, SLP, who really know their own areas. And then you take a step back, and then you have your paras and your RBTs, right? So think of your specialist folks knowing their own skill and coming in to train your paras and your RBTs, because they can be there all the time. Your paras and your RBTs are the ones who are going to always be with XYZ students. So again, the SPED educator or SPED teacher's role is to make sure your SLP folks come in on time, they train your para, they train your RBT, they teach them to collect the data, they teach them to graph the data, and you know, so essentially just like almost like micromanaging those little things. And SPED teachers, all you gotta do is make sure they come in, train your folks, and your RBTs or your paras actually do what they're supposed to be doing. So it kind of like helps you streamline the process as well, because case managing can be really stressful because you don't have one student, you have like 6, 7 students. So that's just like a lot of paperwork, a lot of little details to pay attention to. Yeah, how about this one? Is it only in the classroom? Fun. Yeah? No? Just the classroom, right? I mean, like, whatever. No. All the time. All the time, since your student comes to school, to the time they'll leave, every single thing, as long as it's in the IP goal, right? So that's kind of your, essentially your book to go to, your manual. Ha, fun stuff. No stress, no pressure. Yeah, so graphing the data is really what it all comes down to, right? Because collecting data, numbers, it can be really hard to interpret. But when you have it on that beautiful graph, it's so easy to see. And graphs do intimidate people, right? They do, because it's like you have so many numbers across so many days, across so many skills. Like, what do I do with this? Like, can someone just come and do this for me so I can just be like, bye? We wish. But again, remember, it's not the special education teacher's role. It's the specialist person's role to help your RBT or paraprofessional to make sure they're collected, they're graphed, and they're presented. So again, I want to keep stressing on this just because I understand that there are role confusions, and that's kind of a place where a lot of frustration comes out. So don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. So one of the things, one of the questions that was in the survey was, how do we know what to measure? Like, what do I do? I have a goal, like, what do I do? So I just want to take a minute and read this so that we can kind of come back and talk about it. Okay, so frequency. Basic just count. How many times do I scratch my head? Just 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So essentially this is Bob got out of his seat 3 times a day. Chad scratched her head
6 times now, frequency. Now, frequency is great, right? Awesome. Super easy to count. As long as you can count the behavior, all you do is count. But frequency doesn't tell us the severity of the behavior. So, chat scratch their head 6 times in 6 minutes versus chat scratch their head 6 times in an hour. Those two are different, right? So rate kind of gives you more context as to how severe the behavior is. The duration, how long the behavior lasts for. Can you all think of an example? So there's an example right here. Jalen stared out of the window for 4 minutes. I just want you to take a minute, think about some of the students in your classroom, and think about one of their behaviors where you would actually use duration. How long would behavior happen?
Had a kid cry for 3 hours.
Wow.
And pull blinds off the wall. So
Yeah.
I just had to sit back and wait for them to come down.
Just start the stopwatch and just stop it, right? That's a great example. Sleeping in class. How long did you have a kid who always sleeps in class? Just hit the timer when they go to sleep. Cut it off when they get up. So that's the duration, right? And then latency. So latency is essentially how long, the time between how long you give the student a demand or a task to how long they actually start doing it. So for example, you have a student who, whenever you present a math assignment in front of him or her, they just look all over but don't actually start working on it, right? So what you want to do is eventually decrease the time that they take in between before starting that assignment. So that's where kind of latency will be helpful. And then you have magnitude. So this is kind of critical when you're having those really intense behaviors. So think about biting, think about hitting. So it's I can just hit Derek on the shoulder, but how do I explain the intensity of it, right? So usually we use things like open hand, closed fist, and how far is my hand from his arm? So is it 1 foot, 3 feet? Because that kind of helps me determine the magnitude of that behavior. So these are little ways that you can quantify behaviors given the IT goals that you want to measure. So I will send you my portion of slides. Sorry, we didn't speak about this, but so Derek and I will send you all our slides. So this is kind of like a little map, which has not so great pixels on this right now, but it's essentially like a flow chart on the behavior and I forgot the word, dimension you can use to measure, right? So this really looks like, for example, can you observe the problem behavior? If you can, this is the route you need to go. If you can't, this is the route you need to go. And then, do you have enough people to observe this behavior in your class? Because, for example, if it's something like crying, you don't have the time to sit there and keep taking data. You have other things to do. So thinking about the resources in your classroom that kind of can help you collect that data. So what if the video will work? Sorry, we're just kind of figuring things out in the chat. Not so sure. Let's try this one. Let's accelerate this. Maybe copy paste. Trying to see. So I just wanted to show you all a video. So we can.
Just opening them up.
Oh yeah, that's true. Let's see here. Okay. Before that, let's actually do some of these examples. I'm just kind of trying to use the time as well. Okay. So, going back to dimensions, right? So I want you to read this example and see what dimension that you can use to actually measure Jessica's behavior. So Jessica finishes an addition problem. Her teacher measures the time it takes for her to start the next addition problem.
Latency.
Okay, we have yeah, so what is the dimension you will measure? So we have latency one. Yeah, so in a place like this, you want to see how long it actually takes Jessica to start doing the assignment whenever her teacher presents to it, right? So we have, say for a start, she takes 10 minutes. So your goal would be to shorten that time period eventually, where the minute the teacher gives Jessica a task, she does it, right? So let's try this one. The teacher is wanting to reduce the amount of time it takes Jeremy to log off the computer when told to do so.
Duration.
So we have duration. Yep. Yeah, so I tell Derek, I was like, Derek, go get me some water. He's still there. So you start your stopwatch. And I want to see how long he actually takes to go ahead and get me my water. Right? And then the last one. Still no water, but that's okay. The classroom teacher reports Jenny is laying her head down on the desk all of the time instead of paying attention and working. What can you measure?
Well, if it's all the time, it's
Wait, what's the difference between count and rate and frequency?
It's kind of the same. Counting and frequency are the same. But rate is when you use time. So like Chat's crashing ahead 6 times in 10 minutes versus an hour.
It says she's laying down all the time, so that would be 6 hours.
Yeah.
7 hours.
So that would be what?
That wouldn't be it either, would it?
Would it be duration? Yeah. Yeah. So this next slide kind of is also another example of like how you can use like which dimension you need to use given the behavior, right? So you have continuous data and discontinuous data. Now, if you look at continuous data, there's a clear start to the behavior, there's a clear end to the behavior. And if you have start and stop end, that's where you use frequency. So every time I scratch my head, there's a start. And every time I put my head down, hand down, it's a stop. So just like really categorizing, and we're not going to touch much on interval and time sampling, but I think just like frequency, rate, duration, those are like some of the common things that classroom teachers use. Okay, so I do have an exercise right here, so we can actually do this one. Okay, yes. Oh, won't open. Tech issues. Copy pasted essentially. Okay, I'm going to have some handouts.
Oh, there it is.
Okay. So I guess take one and pass, and you can see both sides have printouts.
I think this is one.
Is it? Okay. Sorry.
15, I got 2 of these.
Okay, so I want you to turn onto the frequency recording form side. So you will see one is frequency, one side is frequency, the other side is partial interval. So turn on to the frequency side, right? And then on there, you will see Joyce, and you see the date, and then you see the teacher and the observer. Now, I'm going to show you all a video, and essentially, so this is Joyce that you see here, right? Now, every time, it's a really funny video. So every time Joyce has been told to write a journal entry, she will engage in the following behaviors. Makes comments to herself or to others like, oh, this is boring. Or gestures like, oh, signing, right? That's totally unrelated to the academic material. So here what we're going to do is really collect frequency data, all right? So first, let's just look at the comments that she makes to herself. So every time you hear one of these comments that's expressing frustration or annoyance, I want you to put a tally on that first box, right? So keep putting tallies every time you see the behavior. And this video clip is around 5 minutes and 20 seconds. So is everybody ready? Let's just hope the sound works now.
All right, everybody, what holiday have we been talking about all week? Thanksgiving! Right, and so today, since Thanksgiving is next week, today in your journals, we've been talking in class about things that we're thankful for, but today I want you to write in your journal and write about things that you're thankful for, okay?
Every holiday we have to do this. It's just so boring. But it looks like I have to. So annoying, the same assignment every year. So boring, can't we do something else for a change? Be thankful I don't ever have to do this again.
Do any of y'all have any Joyces in your class?
Do you want to do something
her. She's adorable.
I know.
She's so frustrated with the Thanksgiving assignment. But, so let's just hear kind of what the frequency looks like. So if anyone can just kind of shout out what the frequency data look like for them. So and I think it's important just because to make sure we understand the definitions and we're all, because if we really understand the definitions, we should all kind of have approximately similar frequency data, right? So I think the goal of this assignment is to make sure we understand the operational definitions. So
I think she signed 5 times and had 5 comments.
5 times, signed 5 times and 5 comments.
5 size and 5 comments.
Okay. Anybody else got 5 comments or similar? 5? Okay.
Yeah, I had 11 combined.
Okay, so kind of 10. So 10, 11 combined signs and comments, but in isolation 5, 6 each. Yeah, awesome. So that kind of goes to show why operational definitions are so important, because if you hadn't known and really understood what to count, we would have like different answers. So the next exercise we're going to do is writing operational definitions.
What was that next explanation? Operational.
Yeah, operational definitions. You can still keep the sheets with you, but first we're going to watch this video. Yeah, I didn't look it. Let's go back to the video. Let's see, like, can you do it on here? Can you like right click and like say open or something?
It just started tracking.
Okay, bummer. Sorry about that. Okay, so anyway, the next task, which the video doesn't open, I want to kind of show you all a video and then together come with an operational definition, but that's okay. So I actually, as the last thing, I want to touch on IP goals, right? And this is something Derek mentioned initially in his presentation. So to be realistic, how do you all feel about IP goals? Like, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you have to write IP goals?
Oh, writing IP goals.
Do you, yeah. Do you come at it with a sense of joy?
Absolutely. Oh, so much joy.
Oh, that's what I want to hear. But sometimes you don't have a choice, but we go try to love it, right?
I sometimes think that it's necessary if we want to target behavior, we want to target academic skill, right?
Yeah.
That means we have to be able to operationally define what the academic or the behavior is going to be.
Exactly.
But sometimes there's more than one behavior.
Right.
Right? I mean, might be in the table one time, he's under the table the next time, maybe it's just out of his seat, or maybe he's spitting one time and then he's scratching the next time. So they're all behaviors.
Right.
And then so different teachers, different personnel, different parents operationally define those behaviors differently.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to know how to specifically define. I mean, most of the people I talk to say, well, just go with duration or go with something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's kind of hard because when behaviors are off and on all day long, that's all you're doing.
Exactly.
So being specific would be a very good thing. Short, definable.
Yeah.
Something attainable, SMART goal, specific,
Yeah.
measurable, achievable, realistic.
Definitely.
With a timeline, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Sometimes they get ambiguous because we want to add too much, and I do this myself. I sometimes think it's better with more, should be less.
Yeah.
But it's a challenge.
Actually, less is more, and making it specifically targeted. And it's like I said before, as special educators, you have the best intentions for your students and you want to do all these things. And, being ambitious is okay. But I think the thing to remember there is like take it step by step, and that's okay. And you may be making so much gain with 3 IP goals versus like 10 IP goals, where it's like almost a half done, half baked, where the kid's not making progress like you expected, right?
Well, sometimes our IPs come to us fairly large.
Right.
They come up through the ranks fairly large.
Yep.
Now, Dave was making a comment how he likes to narrow the focus, and I think we ought to think about what the big boulders are. Because if we take care of the behavior, they'll probably be sitting. If they're sitting, they're probably reading.
Yeah.
So let's do behavior, communication,
right.
and then think of some academics that uses the vehicle to drive those 2 major boulders.
Right.
Because if we get those in check, the others are going to fall into line just naturally.
Yeah, I agree. Addressing behaviors is key to get anything done. So if your IP goal is Johnny is going to be sitting on the carpet for 5 minutes out of like 4 out of 5 prompts, that's like a big step towards like the other wonderful things you want to do with your kiddos, right? So I just wanted to put this out there because I think like having like a helpful guide, SMART goals is great, right? But if you want to take it a step further and maybe make it more specific, this is kind of a template that you can follow. And with that, I also wanted to touch. Derek mentioned, having an IP goal versus having an IP objective. And I just wanted to see what y'all thought about, like what your perceptions were about these things, these 2 things. Do you think it's the same thing? Can you use it interchangeably? Or do you think they're like separate?
Use what separately?
The IP goal and the IP objective. Are these terms that y'all use interchangeably?
Yes.
Okay. Or do y'all think there's maybe something different to that? I just want to hear from...
Aren't the objectives leading to the goal?
Uh-huh.
So they're all steps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, we tend to use this interchangeably, and I think it's like when you talk about it, it's okay, but I think just having the frame of mind where objectives are just like little steps that you go towards obtaining the bigger goal. So, 3 months into developing the IP and starting all the work, mom would be like, well, he's not attaining this goal. Yeah, that's because the goal has so many objectives, right? And we're focusing on the first objective, 1 step at a time, right? So, look at this example right here. So, by the end of the IP cycle, however long that is, Johnny will correctly produce the pronouns he and she when retelling a story that has just been read aloud in the speech therapy room, as measured by data collection with at least 80% accuracy and no more than 2 reminders as needed. And I want you to pay attention to the ones that are highlighted in red, because those are the exact ones that will be helpful when you write an IP goal. So the first part is, when will the child master the goal? 6 months, 3 months, end of IP cycle in the previous example, right? And then the next one is, write a specific skill you want the child to do. So in this case, correctly pronounce or produce the pronouns he, she when retelling a story that has been read aloud. So it's so specific. It is so detailed that there is no gray area there. Where will the skill be measured? In the classroom, in the playground, in the cafeteria, and in the previous example, in the speech therapy room. The next one, how will progress be measured? Sometimes, data collection is not the only way that you can measure those things, right? You have teacher report, you have grades. So there are like so many ways that you can assess, right? So again, kind of goes back to the more specific you are, the very less loopholes that people can find to, when it comes to litigation and things like that, right? So we just want to be cautious and aware as much as possible. The next one, how accurate must the child be? Like, how would you consider mastery or proficient? And you can kind of use your data, almost baseline data, to determine that 80% or 4 out of 5 trials, 50%, it's okay. to do even 20%, right? Especially if it's like a brand new goal, your first objective can be 20%, like that's okay. We want to be ambitious, we want to be high achievers, and we want to put 80% on that first objective, but it may not be realistic, right? So it's okay to put 20% in there. And the last one, can the child have any support and still be considered to have met the goal? So do you want this child to be independently doing things, with prompts, with partial prompts, with physical prompts? Define, it doesn't matter. As long as you have it on paper, that's almost going to be like your saving grace for that child as well. So with that, I think that was kind of my last one. Yeah, so that's just a little thing. I don't know if the internet's working on yours, but we have around 5-ish minutes. Is the internet working? Do you all have Wi-Fi access on your computers or on your phones? You can take either one, and I want you to go to www.menti.com. You can even use your phone. And when you go in there, you should have a place to put in a code there. If we can, you know, the Menti password. Menti, I should have it saved here, but I want it opened on Drake's computer.
Oh, okay.
So
Let me try it really quick. Oh, it's saved on your...
Yeah, it's saved on mine. I think it's like U-TTEC Labs.
Yeah.
So were y'all able to get into www.menti.com and then put in that code? So 93131774. So in there, you will be asked 2 questions. Do you all see the slides come up? Having trouble accessing, let me know.
I just have 2 questions. It says enter a word and another word.
Yeah, so, okay, we're pulling it up here. Okay, awesome. So if you go to www.menti.com and you put in that number 93131774, you should first see this question: take-home lessons, case management. So we'd like to hear what is one thing that you learned through the first portion of this presentation, which is case management. And if you have trouble accessing, please raise your hand. I'll come to you.
You put in one word describing what you learned about the case management portion of this presentation. So one takeaway.
Yeah, so for example, if maybe information and technology was something that you learned. So think about the first portion, case management. I see overwhelming. I get you, I hear you.
Collaboration is big.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So the next slide, and this is the last one. is a take-home lesson given the data collection portion of it that you just learned. The code is up there. If you have trouble accessing, let me know. Terminology is a big thing.
Everywhere. The connection is everywhere.
Yeah. Awesome. This is some good feedback, I think, for us too. All right. Rule confusion. All right, y'all. So with that, that kind of comes to the end of our presentation. We just have like a minute or two if anyone has any last minute things, but I feel thank you all for participating. We hope this was helpful. We appreciate your time. Friday evenings rough, but thank you for being here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.